One thing that helps an NBA legend in the eyes of many fans is when he's played his entire career for one franchise. It's pretty difficult to do because the NBA is a business, and in most cases when a team has no use for a player anymore, they pat him on the back and tell him it's time for them to go. This often leads to the corpse of some legends being passed around from team to team at the ends of their careers, so much so that many fans might not even remember those players played there, and that's what I'm here to highlight today. 7 NBA legends you didn't know played for certain franchises, and I'm gonna explain how that came about. What's up NBA fans, Dom2K on the mic, and I've got to say I probably shouldn't even be making this video because 9.9 times out of 10, when these NBA legends spend their dying days on a different franchise than the one they played their entire careers for, it ends up looking pretty ugly. For example, I'm a die-hard Celtics fan, and I remember watching Garnett on the Nets in the playoffs against the Miami Heat, and I'll never forget seeing him miss an uncontested layup at the rim, and I damn near dropped to the floor and prayed for mercy on the rest of his career, cause that kinda hurt my soul to watch. In any case, those type of events are why you probably haven't heard of any of these guys climbing into their career coffins with these franchises, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Number 7, Robert Parish. If you watched my previous video about Michael Jordan's trash talk, you already know that Parish was very briefly a Chicago Bull, where he'd pick up his 4th and final championship ring on a team with Michael Jordan. But if you're a young fan and you heard how good Robert Parish was, don't think this addition made the Bulls some kind of super team. The man was already 43 years old, and this was pretty much his corpse that was delivered to Chicago. It had already been 6 seasons since he made an all-star team by the time he got there, and he only played about 9 minutes a game and averaged 3 points, so that's a far cry from where he actually was. About the only interesting thing that came of him being a Chicago Bull was the brief run-in he had with Michael Jordan during a practice, so if you hadn't heard about that, you should check out this video. Number 6, Shawn Kemp. I feel pretty terrible about bringing this one up, to be honest, because I feel like the last images any of us should have in our head involving Shawn Kemp should be him humiliating that guy on the Warriors. We only really see highlights of him donning the Sonics green, but he ended his career playing for 3 different franchises, and his worst times came with the Trailblazers. His time with the Cavs were surprisingly good considering the shape he was in, but when the lockout happened, he began to abuse drugs and alcohol, and the problem was clearly reflected in his numbers as you see this significant dip right here. Normally when you see a player's numbers dip this far, it's due to some kind of injury, but his season in 2001 actually ended with him checking in the drug rehab. His career never recovered from those problems, and you don't need to look at his stats to figure that out. All it takes is his side-by-side picture from the Sonics to the Magic, and it pretty much speaks for itself. So if you never heard that Shawn Kemp was in Portland or Orlando, well, now you know why. Number 5, Penny Hardaway. Penny Hardaway's career is one of the saddest what-if stories of all time, but I'm not gonna waste time going into it because his story is all over YouTube, all over the internet, so we all know what he could have been. But as a result of all those injuries, he ended up playing in some pretty strange places. We've all seen Penny in a Phoenix jersey. That's not all that interesting, and chances are that you've seen him in a Knicks jersey as well because he wasn't absolutely terrible there, and he stayed a few seasons, so you might have already seen him there. But did you know that Penny actually retired in a Heat jersey? Yeah, as funny as it sounds, the 90s phenom was actually playing in the NBA all the way into the year 2007. And that year, he signed for the veterans minimum to be reunited with Shaquille O'Neal, and it was originally a move to replace Eddie Jones. Surprisingly, Hardaway actually started 8 of the 16 games he played for the Heat before being waived to open up a roster spot. A fun fact that probably doesn't mean anything to anybody, his stint with the Miami Heat marked the first time he wore a different number on his jersey than number 1. It's so insignificant and nobody was checking for Penny after the 90s anyways, but I had to make his lackluster time with the Heat sound interesting somehow. Number 4, Gary Payton. The Glove is easily one of the, if not the best defending guards in NBA history. In 13 seasons with the Seattle Supersonics, he was able to make 9 All-Star appearances, pick up a Defensive Player of the Year award, and make the NBA Finals where he'd fall victim to Michael Jordan pretty much like every other 90s legend. Because of these, towards the back end of his career, he began ring chasing a bit, signing with the Lakers and the Heat, but you already knew that happened, and that's not what I wanted to tell you about. For an extremely brief stint in 2003, Payton played for the Milwaukee Bucks after he was traded from the Sonics in that deal involving Ray Allen, so if you never knew how Ray Allen became a Seattle Supersonic, that was the trade that made it happen. Payton was getting older and the Sonics were not about to spend any money on an old player, nor were they holding out for him to leave in the summer while they get nothing in free agency. And after the Lakers experiment failed, Payton was traded to the Boston Celtics of all people. He played pretty much every game there before packing up and finally going to Miami where he'd win his first ring and retire. I felt like Payton was perfect for this video because practically everyone seems to know he went to LA and Miami, but not even I knew he was donning a Bucks jersey for a couple of games. Number 3, Hakeem Olajuwon. You could probably call Hakeem the greatest or most skilled center of all time, and you really wouldn't be wrong, and for that reason a lot of people followed his career very closely. He played a total of 17 seasons with the Houston Rockets and picked up a repeat on his journey there. Unfortunately, instead of becoming one of the most esteemed legends that played his entire career with one franchise, in 2001 Hakeem was dealt to the Toronto Raptors to play with the high flyer Vince Carter. However, what you might not know about this one is that this was actually per Hakeem's request. Shortly before he was traded, he rejected 2 contract offers from the Rockets worth both $10 and $13 million spread over 3 years. The Rockets upped the offer to show how much they really wanted him, but Hakeem declined both and requested the trade. By the time all this happened, Hakeem was only averaging 11 points and 7 rebounds, so the Raptors were able to get him for a first and second round draft pick. While he was on the Raptors, Hakeem averaged 7 points and 6 rebounds before being forced into retirement from back injuries. In a perfect world, Hakeem would have had a resurgence of some sort to help Vince Carter overcome the Sixers and possibly make the NBA Finals, where he could have rematched with Shaquille O'Neal, and Shaq would have probably dominated him either way. But unfortunately, Father Time is undefeated, and no such help was available by the time the playoffs came around. Number 2, Patrick Ewing. I honestly feel like it's common knowledge that Ewing played his final season with the Orlando Magic. We've all at least seen one photo of him in the jersey and asked ourselves, how in the hell did this happen? So that's not what I'm wanting to talk about. Actually, right before Orlando, he made a short stop with the Seattle Supersonics, and the story behind this is pretty interesting because you may not know that this trade was the reason the Knicks were so pissed for, well, pretty much the entire 2000s. First off, Ewing was getting older and dealing with injuries such as a torn Achilles in the 1999 playoffs. When he came upon his final contract year worth way more than he was worth at that time, the Knicks basically forced themselves into a bad decision. Although Ewing requested the trade, the better move for the Knicks at that time would have been to just let his contract expire and move on so they could possibly sign a guy like T-Mac that next summer. Instead, they took on a bunch of terrible contracts and players that nobody really wanted, and the result was a rebuilding process that didn't get any better until around 2010, if you want to call it better. I mean, yeah. Ewing finished up his career between the Magic and the Sonics, and he has mentioned that he really regrets requesting the trade in the first place. He says that at the time, people began to say that the team was better without him, and it was Latrell Sprewell's team. That, combined with the fact that New York wouldn't extend his contract, caused him to ask for the trade, but he said that if he could go back and do it all over again, he would have definitely finished up with the Knicks. Number 1, Dominique Wilkins. I think out of all of these that I've done, Wilkins probably has the most intriguing moves that ended his career because he played for so many teams, yet literally nobody remembers him outside of a Hawks jersey. I think that in about 20 years, this is how we're going to look at Paul Pierce because everyone's going to remember the Boston days, but kids that are young or unborn right now, they're going to be pretty surprised to find out that he hit about 3 more franchises before retirement. Anyways, first things first, in the year 1992, Wilkins suffered a ruptured Achilles tendon that ended his season. Although, if I covered up the games played section, you wouldn't even be able to tell he suffered a career-threatening injury from his stats because he kept producing, and that's pretty amazing in of itself. That makes it all the more amazing that while the Hawks were a first seed, the Hawks decided to trade Wilkins to the Clippers, making it the first and still the only time a team leading a conference traded their leading scorer after All-Star break. This move becomes incredibly stupid when you realize that A, the Hawks were having their best season since drafting Wilkins, and B, there was no Larry Bird Celtics, no bad boy Pistons, or Jordan-led Bulls to keep them from making the NBA Finals. The rationalization, I just did air quotes there, behind this was that the Hawks, they kind of saw Wilkins as a one-dimensional player in the last year of his contract that was taking shots away from other stars like Kevin Willis, and the second part of that was that the piece they got in return, his name was Danny Manning, and he was looking like the next big thing at the time, to which I respond, this has to be one of the worst trades in NBA history, because not only did the Hawks go out in the second round that year after the trade, Danny Manning still left them in free agency, so they were left without a star. Why on earth would you trade the cornerstone of your franchise while having your best season and a shot at the title? This would be exactly like if LeBron James retired right now and whatever team takes his spot in the East, they trade their leading scorer after All-Star break when it looks like they're going to make the NBA Finals. That's just how crazy it is. Anyways, Wilkins didn't stay with the Clippers that long because, well, who would do that if they had the chance? I mean, Ron Harper equated playing for the Clippers to a jail sentence, so yeah, it's pretty bad. It's no better now than it was back then. Wilkins left in free agency and then he signed with the Boston Celtics, and at this point, I feel kind of crazy for being a Celtics fan that had no clue Wilkins ever wore a Celtics jersey. Seriously, I've never seen one highlight from this time, so it's not my fault. After taking a season off from the NBA, he came back and signed with the San Antonio Spurs. Now this was supposed to work because they had David Robinson and Wilkins could still play, so he was playing backup small forward for them, and for an extremely brief time he got to be teammates with David Robinson. That would have been a cool duo, but he broke his foot, and that's actually what led to them getting the Tim Duncan pick. After taking yet another season off from the NBA, Wilkins played a very short time with the Magic in the 99 season. At this point he just had nothing left in the tank, and that proves the Orlando Magic are just cursed. For the Spurs, he was actually their leading scorer, but after just one season of rest and then coming back, the Magic received his corpse pretty much like they did for the other two guys I mentioned. He went there to properly retire and play with his brother Gerald Wilkins, but I just find this kind of hilarious actually. In this video, we've named 3 former superstars that finished their career with the Orlando Magic, showing that Orlando is either losing their franchise player or signing the corpses of an old one. I guess it's a solid strategy, and it might win a championship one day, especially when they sign LeBron James when he's like 41 years old, so they can go ahead and continue that tradition of paying used up players to sell tickets. And we've reached the end of the video. Those are 7 NBA legends that played for different franchises, and those are the reasons that it happened. We always love to see players, especially the NBA legends, retire with the franchises that they were actually drafted by, but unfortunately that is extremely hard to do. And in an era where super teams have basically taken over, everyone wants a ring, it's going to be even more difficult because when you think about it, it's going to be pretty difficult to rationalize staying loyal to a franchise when all these guys keep on hopping on the same team, and the only way you have a chance to compete with them is if you do the same thing and go with another superstar. So I think by the time another decade or two passes, you can fully expect to see a lot of the guys we have today ending their career with some franchise that you never really saw them playing for. Anyways, I hope you learned something today. Hit like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. Make sure to press the bell next to my name if you want notifications from my videos, and I'll see you guys on the next video.